Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. This is a UK-centric political analysis, discussion, really explainer in many cases, especially for those across the pond or around the world, in Europe, wherever you are listening, Australia, who aren't so conversant on what has been going on in the UK actually since the 1980s, but in terms of our public cognizance of this, probably 2011 onwards. There's this huge debacle going on online with Elon Musk, and the right wing have jumped on this to attack Keir Starmer and Labour, so the political leader, Prime Minister of the UK, in the centre-left party, Labour Party. He was previously head of the Crown Prosecution Service as a barrister. He's basically a legal man, is our Keir Starmer. And he has been involved in investigations into what has happened, what has gone wrong in previous years when this has all kind of come to a head and inquiries have been called and in fact been carried out. Now, Elon Musk has come along as kind of a Johnny-come-lately and said, oh, this is all terrible, as if this is new, right? And this has been a scandal in the UK for almost 15 years now. This is not new. This is kind of old news to some degree, but it is still an issue that remains topical because actually not enough has been done in terms of fulfilling the recommendations of some of these inquiries. But to think that there's been a national cover-up from a kind of centralised point of view is incorrect. To think that things haven't been done, even from Keir Starmer's position as head of the CPS, is incorrect. And there seems to be a real lack of knowledge of some of the details of what's going on. And it has led to a huge amount of disinformation and a massive amount of political opportunism and some horrendous double standards from a number of people, from Musk through to the leader of the Conservative Party, Kemi Badenoch, at the moment. Particularly, I mean, I could say that about certain, Reform MPs, but actually they haven't been in government. The Conservative government have just gone off the back of 14 years in government. So if they're coming along and saying something hasn't been done, and you're like, well, who would be responsible for doing that? Because you've been in charge for 14 years. So I think having a go at a government that's just taken over some months back, sort of half a year ago, I think is fairly rich. Now, what I'm going to do with you is just run through some of the very basics of what has been going on and try and tease out some of the complexities of this, because it's a really complex set of scandals, given that you've got ethnicity involved and that invites in racism. But we also don't want to ignore if ethnicity plays a really important part in this. Then we'll be talking about causality versus correlation and potentially the correlation fallacy. So, are people of certain ethnicities in these certain areas doing this because they have, a certain amount of melanin in their skin? Or are they doing this because of their socioeconomic standard? Are they doing this because as immigrants they're not given access to high aspiration skill sets? Or is it because they're working in a nighttime economy more? Taxi drivers, Uber drivers, in fast food restaurants, where people frequent late at night, and so they are around in the nighttime, and these people are therefore more kind of adjacent to kind of the seedier elements of society and maybe in a better position to be able to access vulnerable people at night. And so trying to understand all of these things and go, is this happening because of their ethnicity? Well, actually, how do we understand how their ethnicity is being causally important, determinative here? Really complex. But of course, people see A and B and go, A caused B. And if you say, right, we have a lot of people with Pakistani heritage being involved in this, it's over-representative of their position in the general population, or their proportion in the general population, therefore they're doing this because they are of Pakistani heritage type thing. We need to be careful. And then that invites in an awful lot of anti-immigration rhetoric and racist rhetoric when that is arguably not justified. But then we also don't want to protect people on the basis of ethnicity if there is something going on there, and that could be behind ideas that there have been cover-ups. I think there have been an awful lot of missteps. There have been consistent issues with connecting care services to police. We've had this, if you know the UK education system, Victoria Columbier, all sorts of different issues where baby P, all these young children who have died, who have been in care, and there have been inquiry after inquiry after inquiry, and still these things don't get sorted out because these huge departments don't talk to each other. And as a result, people slip through the net. Now, very often it's because of cock-up rather than intention. And so we need to also be aware of what's going on in that context. Is it Hamlin's razor? Don't put down to malice what it can be better be explained by cock-up, something like that. So that is, I think, important to think about as well. So lots of stuff going on. Okay, some rewinding. So what did the child sex abuse inquiry say about the grooming gangs? Well, actually, what is the child sex abuse inquiry? Why did it take place? What is the earlier context for this? Why is Elon Musk attacking Keir Starmer over the grooming scandal? So what is the grooming scandal? So prosecutions for grooming and sexual abuse of young girls in England began in 2010, and the number of known victims is in the thousands. The northern towns, so these often northern towns, Rochdale, Oldham, Rotherham, and others, were at the centre of the scandal. In 2014, a landmark inquiry into the abuse in Rotherham by Professor Alex J came to the conservative estimate that 1,400 children had been exploited there between 1997 and 2013, predominantly by men of Pakistani heritage. In 2022, Jay concluded a prolonged national inquiry into child sexual abuse, which warned that it was endemic across England and Wales. And this is what Elon Musk has been banging on about. So let's look at this Evening Standard or the Standard news piece. So a multi-million pound 7-year inquiry. So the idea that there have been no inquiries, that there have been cover-ups is frankly ridiculous. A multi-million pound 7-year inquiry described child sexual abuse as an epidemic in England and Wales. The Independent Inquiry into Child Sexual Abuse, or IICSA, looked at institutional failings and found there were tens of thousands of victims across the two nations, England and Wales, where its final report was published in October 2022. That's the key date for this big inquiry, because of course that was over 2 years ago now, and largely during the time of, or at the end of, the Conservative ruling. So the Conservative government. Laws compelling people in positions of trust to report child sexual abuse and a national compensation scheme for victims failed by the state and other institutions were among a raft of recommendations. It also called on the former Conservative government to hire a cabinet-level children's minister, and establish a child protection authority in its 458-page report, which brought together its overall findings as it urged politicians to act promptly. I don't think any of the recommendations have been met, so it looks like the Conservative government didn't do that. When asked at the time how likely it was the changes recommended would be adopted, inquiry chairwoman Professor Alexis J told a press conference, "We don't have the power to force the government to do it, but they should do it and need to do it." In January last year, some 15 months on, she vented her frustration that action had not been taken and repeated calls for the recommendations to be implemented, demands she reiterated again on Monday. So the Conservative government hadn't done this. I'm not trying to single out the Conservative government here, but when the leader of the Conservative Party and other Conservative politicians, Liz Truss, start attacking Labour for this, it is really quite rich, to be honest. It's incredibly hypocritical. Now, resisting calls for another review, specifically into grooming gangs, Prime Minister Keir Starmer said IICSA's work had been extensive and blamed the previous government for failing to bring it in the recommendations, adding that now was the time for action. The £186.6 million inquiry set up in 2015, so it's not like this was some small inquiry, right? Looked at 15 areas, scrutinising institutional responses to child sexual abuse, including grooming gangs, investigations and abuse in Westminster and the church, and more than 7,000 victims took part. But the inquiry had to survive a number of early blows, with resignations and blunders initially throwing the future of the inquiry into doubt. Some 325 days of public hearings saw testimony from 725 witnesses, including 3 former Prime Ministers, an ex-Director General of MI5 victims, senior police officers and church leaders, while 2.5 million pages of evidence were processed and scores of reports published, with 87 recommendations already made as a result. In an earlier damning report, the inquiry found that there were extensive failures in the way child sexual exploitation by criminal gangs was tackled, with police and authorities potentially downplaying the scale of abuse over concerns about negative publicity. So there's your issue of covering up. So it's not some centralised cover-up, some government like Keir Starmer, the Labour Party cover-up. But it appears that police and local authorities would trying to reduce negative publicity. And of course, then you might be thinking, well, if these are sensitive demographics, like, for example, Muslim populations in northern towns that generally, even though they're actually culturally more conservative, in terms of immigration, they usually support Labour more probably. And so therefore, by targeting certain ethnicities and attacking them and saying, actually, there's an issue here, from a political point of view, any political party will be seen as quite problematic to then winning those communities over in elections. So that's going to be playing a lot in this. So it says later, the lack of accurate and reliable data from police forces, and here's the key, and councils meant the, quote, government and other organisations cannot know the current scale of child sexual exploitation by networks or who is involved in these groups, it said. So information, so when you're calling for, this is me speaking, when you're calling for another inquiry, the problem is you don't have the data. And you can't invent the data. So what you need to do is, like, from now on, we need to be collecting data much more properly. There's no point doing another inquiry because you're just going to find the same sort of things out. Information on race and ethnicity could help prevention and detection by police and play an important role in understanding the crimes and the context in which they occur, the report said, adding that it was unclear whether a, quote, misplaced sense of political correctness or the sheer complexity of the problem had inhibited data gathering. So the inquiry has been done and it doesn't know whether there is some kind of political correctness, don't want to be seen to be attacking this particular demographic, or it's just hugely bloody complex and there are loads of variables at play here. So like I was saying, if immigrants are more likely to end up being lower down the socioeconomic strata, then end up in these certain types of jobs and end up with, maybe less aspiration and fewer qualifications, and you start piecing these things together. I'm kind of spitballing here, making it up, but there are all sorts of variables, and then say, okay, these people are more likely to commit these crimes, but it's because they have all of these other variables going on, which are correlated with, and to some degree, probably causally interrelated with all of these other variables. But it's far too simplistic and rather problematic to say they have done this because they are Pakistani. It's a bit like, you look at Hitler and you look at Stalin, you go, oh, they've got moustaches. Therefore, people with moustaches are more likely to do genocide. That is a correlation fallacy. It's like, probably not the moustaches playing the determinative role there. So poor or non-existent data collection made it impossible to know whether any particular ethnic group is overrepresented. I need to go back a little bit. The inquiry highlighted how high-profile child sexual exploitation prosecutions had involved groups of men from ethnic minorities, which had, quote, led to polarized debate, which is what we're having now, polarized debate about whether there is any link between ethnicity and child sexual exploitation networks. Poor or non-existent data collection made it impossible to know whether any particular ethnic group is overrepresented as perpetrators of child sexual exploitation by networks, the findings added. You see the complexity of what we're going into. This is what you do when you're like responsibly trying to find out what we need to know about a given situation. If you're Elon Musk and you're tweeting offensive stuff on Twitter to 190, 200 million followers, and you're not doing this background reading, you're being deeply, deeply bloody irresponsible. So Elon Musk is dangerous. He's divisive, and people that are jumping in on this are either know they're being divisive and doing this because they have a particular agenda in mind, or they are being ignorant and simplistic in their understanding of what's gone on. This particular article finishes later. It made 6 recommendations. So this is, which is this another inquiry? Anyway, because there are whole suites of recommendations. It made 6 recommendations in response to its findings on grooming gangs. So I think this is, okay, this is probably the IICSA. Only here looking at grooming gangs, including calling on the Department of Education to ban, without delay, placing 16 and 17-year-old children in semi-independent or independent care if they are a sexual exploitation victim or at a heightened risk of becoming one. Police forces and local authorities should also be required to collect data on all cases of known or suspected child sexual exploitation, including by criminal gangs and the ethnicity of the victims and perpetrators, the inquiry said. In other words, from now on, we need to be collecting data correctly. So that's what's taken place. That gives you a little bit of I mean, goodness, we need 6 hours to talk about this remotely in the required depth. Now, what was Keir Starmer's role in tackling the scandal? Well, this Guardian piece says Starmer ran the Crown Prosecution Service between 2008 and 2013, meaning he was responsible. So he started under the Labour government in 2008 to 2010. And then 2010 to 2013, he was doing that job under the Conservative government because actually he was deemed as pretty good at what he did. Meaning he was responsible for bringing charges for alleged crimes in England and Wales. That's between 2008 and 2013. In 2009, 9 months after Starmer took the role, a decision was taken not to prosecute alleged perpetrators in Rochdale. CPS lawyers argued that the victim would not come across as reliable or credible in this one particular case. There is no evidence that Starmer was made aware of the details of the case, but nonetheless, Musk has claimed that, quote, Starmer must go and he must face charges for his complicity in the worst mass crime in the history of Britain. So we've got this one case where the head of the CPS arguably didn't know about a decision that was made down here with regarding a case that was taking place up in Rochdale. In 2011, so this is when it properly came. So I would argue in 2009, this wasn't a particularly known thing. And then it blew up. So 2010, 2011. In 2011, Afzal, who was a guy, he was a guy that Starmer put in position, the then new chief prosecutor for North West England, overturned the 2009 CPS decision. 9 men were ultimately convicted and jailed in 2012 for the sexual exploitation of 47 girls. Afzal said in 2022, quote, the only way we could bring that case was to admit that we had failed these victims when they had first made a complaint in 2008. Keir was 100% behind the decision to publicly admit that we had got it wrong in the past. So Keir Starmer then, this thing blows up. Keir Starmer puts someone in charge of trying to sort some of these cases out. And then they say, yep, okay, we're going to overturn a 2009 decision because we got that wrong. CPS as a whole got that wrong. In 2013, Starmer revised CPS procedures. So this is what's interesting, is that Starmer actually then did a load of things to improve the situation. So when you've got Elon Musk saying Starmer's complicit in all the X, Y, and Z, Starmer was the one that was actually doing things to make prosecution better for these victims. He's literally got this the wrong way round, arguably. Now, some people on the right will want to see Starmer as responsible, as a single figurehead responsible for all that went wrong, like he was responsible for the crimes or whatever. But actually, what he did was put things in place to ameliorate the situation. So he revised the CPS procedures on how prosecutors should deal with grooming cases in an effort to ensure that the victims would not be dismissed in the future. Afzal later said, quote, Keir left in 2013, the CPS having gone from being dire at doing sex abuse cases to having the highest conviction rate in our history. So that wouldn't have been possible without the support, resources and protection I was given by Keir at a time when it would have been easier to give up. Musk claimed on Monday that Starmer, quote, repeatedly ignored the pleas of vast numbers of little girls and their parents in order to secure political support, even though he did not become a politician until 2015. So the whole defamation that's going on here of Keir Starmer, Gordon Brown as a previous Labour politician is fascinating, and it's equally fascinating that Keir Starmer is saying nothing about the Conservative government from 2010 to 2024. Like, 14 years of rule, the large period, like this happened in 2011, really, is when it started, 2010, 2011. That's when the Tories took over. 2010 to 2024, this is a Conservative Party thing. They were in government. So it's absolutely staggering what's kind of being said. So then you've got this thing where Kemi Badenoch has come along and is calling from a group. So she is now the head of the Conservative Party. She is a right-wing populist. I mean, obviously right-wing Conservative Party, but actually gone down a real populist track there. And this other Evening Standard article, Badenoch calling for a grooming scandal inquiry and why is Labour rejecting it, says a 2022 report, so that's the IICSA, found children in the Manchester suburb were failed by care agencies and allegations of alleged grooming by predominantly Pakistani offenders in council homes and shisha bars and by taxi drivers. In 2012, when he was leading the Crown Prosecution Service, CPS, Sir Keir Starmer admitted that CPS had let vulnerable girls down under a case that was dropped against a rape suspect in 2009 despite evidence pointed to their guilt. So that's what we talked about before. He said at the time, quote, in a number of cases presented to us, particularly in cases involving groups, there's clearly an issue of ethnicity that has to be understood and addressed. As prosecutors, we shouldn't shy away from that. But if we're honest, it's the approach to the victims, a credibility issue that caused these cases not to be prosecuted in the past. There was a lack of understanding. This is very common in a lot of cases. So what is it? The Matt Gaetz one. Recently, the reason the American judicial system, the DOJ didn't take it on, in the end it went to an ethics committee, but the DOJ didn't take it on because of the credibility of the witness. And now we look back at the ethics report and it's like, the evidence was pretty overwhelming. Matt Gaetz could have been done really by the DOJ. But this is quite a common thing where you look at the credibility, they're always weighing up, are we going to win this case or not? We're not going to win it, we're not going to go for it. Or, there are these thresholds. But anyway, there was a lack of, as prosecutors, we shouldn't shy away from that. If we're honest, it's the approach to the victims, the credibility issue that caused these cases not to be prosecuted in the past. There was a lack of understanding. As Director of Public Prosecution, Sir Keir gave the green light to charge members of the Rochdale grooming gang in 2013 and also launched reforms that changed the way the CPS handles child sex abuse cases. A leaked letter shows that in September 2022, the then Conservative Minister for Safeguarding, Amanda Soloway, wrote to an Oldham councillor also dismissing a request for a public inquiry. So there'd just been an inquiry, right? There's 7-year IICSA, and there'd also been these independent inquiries or like localised inquiries for like Oldham, Rochdale, etc., etc. And the Conservative Party turned down a demand for an inquiry. And yet, Kemi Badenoch, the leader of the Conservative Party, is saying there should be this inquiry. So let's listen to, in fact, this might still be live going on at the moment. This is Novara Media talking about this.
Tory leader Kemi Badenoch, who on January the 2nd tweeted this. The time is long overdue for a full national inquiry into the rape gang scandal. Trials have taken place all over the country in recent years, but no one in authority has joined the dots. 2025 must be the year that the victims start to get justice. Now, this demand from Badenoch seems somewhat odd for two reasons. Most obviously, the Tories have been in power or had been in power for 14 years until last summer. So if Badenoch is saying justice is overdue, then surely that's her fault. She was in government for a number of years before she became leader of the opposition. Second, and this is really significant, a national inquiry into child sexual exploitation, which took 7 years and cost millions of pounds, was published in 2022. So there has been a national inquiry on the issue of child sexual exploitation in general, which did include these grooming gangs. Its recommendations have still not been implemented. So the writer of that report, Alexis Jay, said she was disappointed that the Tories hadn't implemented the recommendations, and the current government should hurry up with it instead of doing another full inquiry.
And that's important. So everyone clamouring for an inquiry, it's like, we've got an inquiry, we just need to do, and in fact, that's what Alexis Jay said the other day. Stop calling for another inquiry, just implement the recommendations we got. And that's all you need to do. So, quote, and this is what Amanda Soloway said in 2022, herself a Conservative, denying that an inquiry was needed. It is for the local authorities in individual towns and cities which are responsible for delivering local services to commission local inquiries, she said. So, if that's good enough for the Conservatives, then well, why is it not good enough for the Conservatives now? And it's because Elon Musk is just whipping up a storm. Now, we'll just a few more parts from this article. The scandals have fueled far-right campaigns, it says later, which have focused on cases of large-scale abuse carried out mainly by men of Pakistani descent. An investigation which suggested nervousness about race had prevented victims being helped. In April 2023, the government pledged more data on the makeup of grooming gangs, including ethnicity, to help ensure suspects cannot hide behind their cultural sensitivities as a way to evade justice. The three most notorious child sex gangs, Rotherham, Rochdale and Telford, all had perpetrators predominantly of Pakistani and South Asian descent. However, a Home Office study in 2020 found group-based child sexual exploitation offenders are most commonly white. Some cases, such as the 2010 convictions of a group of white men and a woman for abusing 30 children in the Camborne area of Cornwall, received less attention than the convictions in the Northwest. So two things going on here. One, most commonly, it's white people doing this, and they don't receive the amplification on social media and in the media because, hey, it's white people doing that, and it's much more controversial if we blow up that it's brown people doing that. However, it's not about who does more of it, but it's about proportionality. So, yeah, okay, white people still do more, but what are the proportion of people doing it compared to the underlying proportion of the overall population? And if there is a skew there, if there's an over-representation there, then that still needs to be answered. So, yeah, on the one hand, white people do it more in real terms, but on the other hand, proportionally, actually, statistically, there are these gangs that do it that have different ethnicities. Okay, and this article ends. A Labour spokesperson said the government is, quote, working at pace to implement the recommendations in Professor Alexis Jay's IICSA report. They added, quote, we have both supported the national overarching inquiry into child abuse, which reported in 2022. So as the opposition government, they supported that report. And local independent inquiries and reviews, including in Telford, Rotherham and Greater Manchester. This government is working urgently to strengthen the law so that these crimes are properly reported and investigated. Now, this is a massive area of polarised debate. So the Quilliam Foundation, as one foundation, has gone hard on that this is an ethnicity problem. Grooming gangs. This is a Medium article by Jay Spooner and Jay Stubbs saying grooming gangs, the Quilliam and the myth of the 84%. This is from 2018, but it looks at some of the claims whereby they are saying, this is really problematic. This is an ethnicity problem, and it goes to town on the statistical analyses here and all the problems with this. This is an absolutely phenomenal article, as in, it's very well argued, it's very well put together, it's very long. I'm going to just read you some of the conclusion because I think it kind of wraps up some of the issues. But as you can see, it's a very long article with lots of case studies. And again, 2018 is 6 days old. I'm sure there's more that can be added to it now. If we go to the conclusion, goodness me, where are you? Conclusion. That's how long this article is. Addendum. I've probably gone past it. Yes, I have. So we'll read some of the conclusion, but by no means all of it. Here it is. It's these. It was here. These. Conclusion. So Quilliam's report concludes laying out a 6-point plan to combat what they describe as, quote, a child sex abuse scandal, the likes of which Britain has never seen before. Yeah, as highlighted earlier, this study does nothing but further obfuscate an already convoluted area of research that relies on crystal clear methodology and precision in its findings. Arguably, the most revealing way that Quilliam just you don't really need to know who they are and what they've done. Have muddied these waters is by the omission of entire studies whose conclusions don't echo their own, as well as the limitational caveats of those that do. For instance, Rafiq and Adil's major source for their findings section, the CEOP 2013 report, observes that, quote, the most comprehensive prevalence study of to date of group offending and gang-associated offending was undertaken in 2012 by the Office of the Children's Commissioner. Yet, incredibly, the 2012 OCC report has not been mentioned by the Quilliam authors at all. In other words, what people often do is cherry pick with their confirmation bias data that supports them, but ignore data that doesn't, and so on and so forth. I mean, we don't need to go into the details here. And it talks about statistics here, most commonly white, but again, it's about proportionality, isn't it? 2012, well, actually, let's go back to 2012. Let's move on a little bit. So the OCC identified several motivating factors of grooming gang members, including money, power, control, and sexual gratification. They did not identify race, culture, or religion. They attribute the offender victim disproportionately in part to flawed recording methods. Having analysed the evidence, they've concluded that there is, quote, more than one type of perpetrator, model, and approach to child sexual exploitation by gangs and groups. Previously, it talked about like misidentifying even what Asian means. So the Afghan, Kurdish, and white British perpetrators were noted down as being Asian, and then that gives you this sense that the Asian proportionality is more prevalent than it really is. Anyway, I want to just go into a couple of bullet points here. It talks. There are other studies that need to be taken into account, says this article. And then the above list is by no means extensive, but referring to either the 2012 OCC report or any one of these studies would have provided some much needed context into Quilliam's conclusions. For example, the 2016 Bernardo's report finds that, quote, according to the Office of the Children's Commissioner for England, 13 models of exploitation were identified during an inquiry into sexual exploitation in gangs and groups. It does illustrate that the model of sexual exploitation most often seen in the public is only one of many. So, this idea that you've got Asian grooming gangs is one of many that is going on. Now, CEOP figures show that in Britain, 96% of the child, and this is a really important point, by the way, CEOP figures, so these are child exploitation, what does the OP stand for? Anyway, show in Britain, 96% of the child victims of indecent images of children are white. In all of these images showing sexual contact between an adult and child, all the offenders were white. De Quilliam therefore conclude that white men are racially targeting white children. Is the white and Christian British background of the offenders motivating their crimes? If not, why not? This is almost one of the most important things I'm going to say here. If you are happy to say that these grooming gangs of Pakistani heritage, let's say, for example, they are more proportionally relevant, they are overrepresented, for example, the Pakistani community with grooming gangs, and thereby you conclude, I would argue incorrectly, that it's their Pakistaniness or their brown skinnedness that is responsible for them doing this. Then what do you say about these individual paedophile abuse cases, child abuse cases, where almost 100% of them were white? Oh, okay. So why can't you say that it's the whiteness of these people that are overrepresented in the individual cases? Why is it not due to their whiteness? Because you've just said that those gang ones is due to their brownness, and these individual ones, why is that not due to their whiteness? Okay, so this is complex. So there are other things going on here. That's almost one of the most important points of my entire video. All three of the CEOP, the OCC, and the Home Office are in agreement that groomers of children target their victims according to their vulnerability and not their race. So the idea is that these Pakistani groups or Asian groups or whatever are targeting white children specifically is another trope that we hear a lot of, but at least the CEOP, OCC and Home Office are saying actually it's their vulnerability. And it just so happens they're more likely to be white children who are more vulnerable in these places. The CEOP theorizes the greater levels of freedom afforded to white children that make them more vulnerable to sexual exploitation, and all three studies describe the underreporting of ethnic minority victims. In other words, when you do have brown victims of sexual exploitation, they're less likely to come forward about it. A, by the victims themselves owing to their unique cultural considerations, and B, in how the police document the crimes due to a racial bias. They, quote, were more likely to identify children who were white British, according to the OCC. So on and so forth. So this is complex. The point of me going into this article that was very particular to do with the Quilliam report is that these issues here show you how complex it is when you're trying to understand causality in any given societal thing, really. Okay. So I've been banging on for quite a long time, and this will be a fairly long video. I now want to go to James O'Brien, who is a reporter on, or an anchor on LBC, London Broadcasting Corporation. And he, although it says leading there, he is really incensed by what Kemi Badenoch and Elon Musk and Liz Truss. So Liz Truss has put her oar in as well, as a former prime minister, now has been, kicked out of government and is no longer an MP. James O'Brien here talks about, okay, well, what now does Keir Starmer do? What does the Labour government do about this? How do they deal with Elon Musk absolutely going hammer and tongs and saying morally egregious things about, say, Jess Phillips, one of the MPs who's in charge of safeguarding, saying she is a grape genocide apologist, and then saying that Keir Starmer is complicit, and he reposted something saying, I am Keir Starmer and I facilitate rape, or something like that. So Elon Musk is going hard at the UK government. He's calling on there to be a dissolution of Parliament, the King to dissolve Parliament. He's saying his latest, absolutely incredible this. So if you go and find Elon Musk on Twitter, and he's almost certain, look, number one, I opened Twitter, he's number one there. Of course he is. He says here, now, like that time that Keir Starmer called real blah, 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 blah. So he's having a go at Keir Starmer. This is what he does. He has got a pinned poll at the top of his thread that says America should liberate the people of Britain from their tyrannical government. He is calling on America to invade the UK to liberate us from our tyrannical Keir Starmer-led government. So this is serious. This is why people are talking about this an awful lot. Now, James O'Brien does a phenomenal job of discussing this here, and I am going to play all of this, and I am going to interject a little bit here and there.
But I'm not, in the first instance, quite sure how. So something a bit weird has happened to me in the context of what you might describe as Elon Musk's universe. And I don't think we're going to have this argument today, but I don't think that there is much mileage in the argument that you should just ignore him. I think that's a vexed argument at the very best of times, when somebody is dealing in disinformation and propaganda, or at worst, at the very least, dealing in sort of provocation and unpleasantness. And the idea that you ignore them, to me, always seems to have a slight caveat attached to it. You ignore them until you can't. But
does Keir Starmer do nothing
case,
and ignore?
I don't think that caveat applies. If you are essentially in lockstep with the next president of the free world, if you are widely perceived to be the de facto deputy president, if you own one of the biggest social media platforms in the world, albeit one that has become something of a sort of far-right fertilizer since he started unbanning various liars, grifters and racists. If you are the richest man in the world and therefore capable of exercising epic power in all territories almost, then you cannot be ignored. I think it's foolish and naive to pretend that you can. But you notice a little pause in my voice there, I think, just a little catch. Should we be talking about this? Another thing that happened to me, the thing that I was referring to when I said I'm going through quite a strange phase, is that I'm barely on Twitter anymore. And here's a really interesting thing that is going to land with some people listening to this with absolute statement of the bleeding obvious energy, and with other people, I don't think you'll believe me. If you weren't on Twitter much over the holiday period,
Really good point.
then an awful lot of what is dominating the news agenda today will have almost entirely passed you by. It's a really weird thing. I mean, wherever you get your news from, you'll be aware that Elon
everyone's
Musk
talking
has
about it now.
waded into the grooming gang story that has been covered quite widely in this country since 2011. But of course, the myth that it hasn't has taken hold in all sorts of corners of the country. So Elon Musk has waded into that, but much more dangerously, he's launched libelous attacks on Jess Phillips, the safeguarding minister, and on Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, which I think come from essentially subscribing to the sort of accounts that were banned for disinformation and racism before he bought Twitter. I don't know, because as I say, I haven't been on there much, but catching up on it yesterday afternoon and this morning in preparation for coming back to work, catching up on it and wondering, as I always do, whether or not we overthink these things. As far as I can tell, Elon Musk is just another Twitter account, albeit the biggest and the most powerful and the owner and the future de facto deputy president of the USA.
Ouch.
I think he's just another Twitter account that desperately wants to believe all of the posts about all foreigners being criminals. He seems to me to be, I don't know whether white supremacist or whether he's still got the vestiges of the South African apartheid that he grew up on the wrong or the right side of, I suppose, depending on your politics. But you can overthink these things. You can dig too deeply into these things. When perhaps the answer is quite simple. He just believes it all. I know that there are conversations about some of his personal habits, the fact that he apparently doesn't sleep much, the fact that he's up in the middle of the night tweeting about and into the only sort of English language country that will be up and about in the middle of the night in America. But I think he might just be somebody who believes the most ridiculous nonsense from the kind of accounts on Twitter that have now been able to buy prominence by paying him money and getting blue ticks that were once reserved for people that had sort of proven themselves in professional fields. I think he just believes the worst excesses of the sewer that he has created.
Absolutely on point there. So he lives in this ecosystem and reposts these people like Mario Norfal and Cat Turd and so on and so forth. Yeah, Ian Mars Chong, Kim.com. These horrible humans, and he lives in that ecosystem and believes his own bile. It's just this regurgitates stuff and then eats it back up again and then regurgitates and then eats other people's bile as well. And it's just a very dubious situation, it has to be said.
I mean, it's a psychologically extraordinary situation. He just is another person there's always that tension, isn't there, between what you believe and what you want to believe. That idea. So when we first started talking about the grooming gangs on this program in 2011, and recognizing and acknowledging that there was a huge disproportionate representation of men of Pakistani background in that very specific and particular type of crime, I was 2 or 3 phone-ins into the topic before I realized what was bothering me about it. And there was a desperation among some callers to use the crimes of some disgusting and despicable people to malign an entire population, to malign everybody brown, to malign everybody Muslim, to malign...
This is the another really, really hugely important, maybe just as important as the previous point, that the question is about intention. I remember, it's so annoying because I wrote like 5,000 blog pieces and articles for several different organisations. And someone came on my thread some time ago and said, where you keep saying you've done this, where's all your stuff? Who are you? There's no... I lost all my writing, like 5,000 pieces. Because Pathos took all of the non-religious writers off the network and they literally cancelled us. Because they didn't like our politics in the interfaith community there. So they kicked us off and deleted all the stuff, but I actually managed. I've got it all, but I need to put it on my own website now because I then migrated to a media company I work for called Only Sky. That's now been reinvented. I still do a bit of writing for them, but that was then lost about 6 months ago. All of my writing was lost from there. But anyway, that's by the by. I have written on plenty of different topics, and this is indeed one of them. The idea of wanting to find fault with people in order to allow you to discriminate about them. I used to write articles about race and IQ and looking into this age-old, well, not age-old, but this long-existing trope and claim that, black people have a lower IQ than white people, and Asians have the highest IQ, and et cetera, et cetera. And then you look at all the confounding variables. You look at socioeconomic strata, you look at, or state, you look at, this, you look at food, nutrition, you look at and diet, all of these different things. And I was writing this in response to what some people call race realists, that we used to call sort of racists. So these race realists would say things on my threads, and they'd say, X, Y, and Z, and this data point, this data point. Me and someone else that was writing with me, we put together a couple of really, really comprehensive articles concerning race and IQ. And I remember having this conversation, which is exactly what James O'Brien here is talking about, which is, okay, assuming that even once we've controlled for all these variables, even after we've taken into account X, Y, Z, A, B, and C, that there is some correlation between being black and having a lower IQ, or some of these race realists were saying more violence, or being black and being, slightly statistically a little bit of more violence or whatever. There's some small connection there between these two things. So what? Like, what are you going to do with this? Like it's like you want to find that, in this case, black people have a lower IQ than white people. You're a white person. You want to find what are you going to do with that? And then I'd be trying to tease this out. And one of the answers this one particular guy gave me, well, okay, because he realised that actually the kind of game was up there. And it's like, okay, well, I wouldn't let black people in if they're marginally more violent, even or more, to whatever degree he believed it, which is far more than reality. And he said, I wouldn't let them immigrate into the country. And I was like, okay, so you do realise that men are 888% more likely to violent crime than women. So on your logic, you would have no immigration from men. In fact, you wouldn't really, you wouldn't be wanting to take men on in this role or that role or this or that. So if you're going to persecute against this demographic here on account of this correlation, and you're arguing there's a causation there in this domain, then take this example, because that's what you are claiming here, times like 1,000, times 100, times whatever, blows out of the water your issues that you have. So if you want to do that, then you need to be discriminating against men. Okay. So really what I'm trying to understand from you is what you want to achieve by concluding that black people are more or less likely to be X or Y. So what? What are you going to do with it? Because we still need to live together, right? Etc., etc. Okay, so what do you want to do with why are you trying to find the data to suggest that Pakistani people are more likely to be involved in grooming gangs than white people? Okay, and even if we control for all those variables we talked about earlier, and then what? What are we doing here? What are you trying to do here?
Everybody of Pakistani heritage, despite, the percentages being negligible in the context of the broader population. And that, I think, might be where Elon Musk is coming from. Robert Jenrick seems to be coming from there in the last
Robert Jenrick ran for the leader of the Conservative Party. He lost out to Kemi Badenoch, but he's fairly similar.
This desperation to use the crimes of disgusting people to denigrate and malign entire demographics, as if recent scandals in the Church of England rendered every Christian in the country complicit in paedophilia, as if recent scandals in the Catholic Church rendered every Catholic in the country somehow complicit in paedophilia or supportive of violent sex crimes, as if the preponderance of DJs and television presenters that we saw being unveiled as disgusting predators over the last few years somehow taught us anything about television presenters and radio presenters who are not disgusting predators. There's a hunger to use the crimes of a small number of people to malign entire demographics. And I see that going on with Musk, but I see it very much as quite two-dimensional race hate. The kind of accounts I was telling you about last year, where you just have clip after clip after clip of people of colour committing crimes, as if no white person ever commits crime. This desperation to believe that your ethnicity is somehow indicative of your criminality. I'm talking even about ethnicity, not nationality. So I don't know. That seems to me to be partly where Elon Musk is coming from. But his attacks on Keir Starmer are extraordinary. And potentially quite dangerous. You know that 2 members of parliament in this country have been assassinated in recent years. And some of the rhetoric that Elon Musk has shared about Jess Phillips could have a terrible effect upon an impressionable mind in the context of her personal safety. Some of the language that he's deployed, I'll share with you shortly, is absolutely hideous. And similarly with Keir Starmer, to accuse Keir Starmer of a sort of complicity in rape when the man as DPP literally pressed the button on the prosecution of so-called grooming gangs, letting people like Nazir Afzal, the chief prosecutor in the Northwest, go after them with absolute, I'd use the word passion, actually, for want of a better one, go after them with enthusiasm and determination. For Elon.
So that's Keir Starmer getting in someone to prosecute these criminals effectively. That's what Keir Starmer did. What Elon Musk is coming along and just trying to flamethrow everything here without really knowing what's going on.
Musk to claim from a position of, I presume, Twitter-inspired ignorance that Keir Starmer has somehow done something wrong is incredibly dangerous. And also, I don't normally go in for this sort of thing, it offends my patriotic sensibilities as well. Now, I may not have said that if I was presenting this show yesterday morning, because I'm conscious of all the people that would come crawling out of the woodwork to say, oh, you've only got a problem with him because he's such a big fan of Farage. But of course, now he's come out and said that
James O'Brien calls Nigel Farage, I think there's some joke or some reason he calls him Farage, a bit like we often say garage for instead of garage. Some people say, a bit posh way of saying garage, but we say garage. So that's why he says, instead of Nigel Farage, he says Farage. I don't know if that's the same kind of Trump trying to get people's names wrong, or there seems to be some history of him doing that.
Farage is not fit to lead reform, which means that I think you can probably say, without any fear or favour, that nobody should be listening to Elon Musk's opinions on British politics and his, I would say, pretty close to libellous maligning of our Prime Minister and the Labour politician who has done more in the arena of women's safety than arguably anybody else alive, is despicable and disgusting. So who's in favour? Who's cheering him on? And then you come back to this extraordinary subculture of sewage that he has allowed to flourish on his own social media platform, who either believe it or think that there is something to be achieved by encouraging lots of other people to believe it as well. So here's the question. The first one is a bit weird. I haven't been on there much, and I'm not going back, I don't think. I'm on Blue Sky, if you're remotely interested in my occasional burblings, which is an altogether happier space where you're not really allowed. It's not brilliantly regulated because they haven't got the money, but you're not really allowed to lie. And if you don't want to see somebody's toxic bile, it's quite easy to remove them from your orbit. So explain to somebody who's not plugged into social media what Elon Musk...
And just going down Elon Musk's Twitter feed, Geert Wilders, the far right leader of the PVV in the Netherlands, Visegrad 24, that he's massively endorsing at the moment, who they've got their problematic agenda. And then always like Mario Norfal, who's just a terrible, terrible internet phenomenon. And all these sort of others like, GB News, Ian Miles Chong, he leads Doge Designer, lives in this ecosystem of his own creation. James O'Brien here sort of talking to that.
Musk is doing. All right, that's challenge number one, which is relatively easy if you have been...
Let's go through that again.
Explain to somebody who's not plugged into social media what Elon Musk is doing. All right, that's challenge number one, which is relatively easy if you have been paying attention. 0345 6060973. Question number two is altogether different, and I would suspect much, much harder to answer. What should Keir Starmer do about this? You have an incredibly powerful man, objectively incredibly powerful, whether you like it or not, however you dice it, however you cut it. The man is incredibly powerful. Even if it was his wealth and ownership of Twitter alone, his power would be unprecedented. But he is, of course, also a key consigliere to the incoming President of the United States of America, a regime and administration that the Labour government have made it clear they are keen to do business with, for good or for ill. I have no idea how Keir Starmer should handle this. Elon Musk is essentially painting potentially hideous targets on the back of British politicians like Jess Phillips and Keir Starmer, targets that are forged from ignorance and misinformation. But given his power, what on earth can he do? So, what has Elon Musk been up to in the context of British politics and the grooming gang scandals? 0345 6060973. And what on earth, I really need your help with the second one, by the way. What on earth should Keir Starmer do about this? How should Keir Starmer handle it?
That's where we're going to go next,
I've
just to finish off this video.
Over the last few years, is that when you're dealing with lies driven by racism, sometimes the truth doesn't touch the sides. When you're dealing with lies driven by racism, when, for example, the answer to claims about the absence of inquiries is to point out how many inquiries there have been, to point out that Alexis J, who delivered her inquiry that was called partly as a consequence of the grooming gang scandals, has insisted that the last government did nothing to implement the 20 recommendations that she made. I don't think Elon Musk even knows that. I don't think he knows that we spent tens of millions of pounds on an inquiry into child sexual abuse up and down the country, focusing on various quarters, including my old school, would you believe, got a sort of chapter of its own, but looking directly and specifically at grooming gang scandals as well, and made 20 recommendations that the last government ignored. I wonder whether Elon Musk knows.
This is such an important point as well, that, Elon Musk, like I said earlier, is he doing the requisite reading to find out enough about this subject to cast a qualified opinion on it? No, I don't think he knows. This is just surface level, divisive, horrible rhetoric from someone that should know better but clearly doesn't, or does know better and is doing this for an agenda. And his agenda appears to align with that of, say, ultra-nationalist philosopher Alexander Dugin, where he's trying to leave Europe destroyed in a wave of right-wing populism like Geert Wilders, like you know, like we see with Marine Le Pen, with the AfD that Musk is a big fan of. Then you've got Viktor Orban, and you've got Robert Fico. All these people are held up in high regard by those on the MAGA right that have championed Donald Trump, and Trump champions these people. And it's this big wave of growing populism that is in danger of sweeping free and fair elections and democracy away.
The Prime Minister, whose passage into Downing Street was generously greased by Nigel Farage, described inquiries into child sexual abuse as spaffing money up the wall.
So Boris Johnson's come out recently and said, we don't need more inquiries, it's just spaffing money up the wall, is what Boris Johnson, now he's your fairly right-wing populist leader. So, you know, there's a picking and choosing of who to listen to. So Elon Musk, you know, likes Nigel Farage until he doesn't like Nigel Farage because Nigel Farage isn't populist enough, or isn't going down the Tommy Robinson route, isn't going down the let's demonize Muslim kind of route. In fact, Nigel Farage came out, is it last night, in a speech and said, well, there are 1 million Muslims in the UK. We need to make sure that if we're going to be a serious political party going forward, a bit of pragmatism here, like we need to be appealing to them. And then that's then sent people a bit nuts who are like, no, we want to get them out of the country type thing.
Largely unchallenged, I think, in this very studio where Nigel Farage will be sitting tomorrow. It's almost as if the truth doesn't matter because the intoxicating unpleasantness that Twitter is now almost entirely made of is so powerful. So what on earth can Keir Starmer do about it? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. And I mean, I'd sometimes say serious or silly answers, but it's too serious a question to admit silly answers. But by silly, I just mean left field. I mean, I think Brazil closed him down entirely, didn't they?
That's the point.
I'm leaning to the idea that Keir Starmer should just do that. 0345 60.
And I agree with that. So then we hear Keir Starmer. What is it Keir Starmer actually said and done? So just to give you the prepping to this, and this will be the end of the video, Keir Starmer appears to have been strong on certain elements of the rhetoric. So he's come out today and he's actually been rhetorically fairly combative against Musk's position. But interestingly, he's dodged using Musk's name in his own speech here. And he avoids going into battle against Musk, but looks to the British manifestation of Muskian thinking and takes that to task. That's what Starmer does here. And part of me understands that, because actually he's got a country to run. He doesn't want to get derailed by a massive argument with the world's richest man. But on the other hand, he has to say something, and he has to defend the character and the person of Jess Phillips, who's been harshly maligned. So he needs to say something. So he's picking his battle with how the Muskian thinking is manifesting through Kenny Badenoch and through many of the Conservative Party who are not calling out Musk for that rhetoric.
But let's just to bring it in closer, and I will answer you on Jess Phillips in particular, because those that are spreading lies and misinformation,
Musk,
as far and as wide as possible, they're not interested in victims. They're interested in themselves. Those who are cheerleading Tommy Robinson, not interested in justice. They're supporting a man who went to prison for nearly collapsing a grooming case, a gang grooming case. These are people who are trying to get some kind of vicarious thrill from street violence that people like Tommy Robinson promote. And those attacking Jess Phillips, who I'm proud to call a colleague and a friend, not protecting victims. Jess Phillips has done 1,000 times more than they've even dreamt about when it comes to protecting victims of sexual abuse throughout her entire career. And so just...
He's absolutely right, but listen to what he says, those who are doing this, instead of saying Musk. And of course, it is Musk and acolytes and people who are jumping on that bandwagon. So he's trying to broaden it out from Musk to all of these people, to the people in the kind of far right or right wing ecosystems where this is gathering momentum.
Just as I took on the criminal justice system and the institutions when I was chief prosecutor, I'm prepared to call out this for what it is. We've seen this playbook many times, whipping up of intimidation and threats of violence, hoping that the media will amplify it. Now, Jess Phillips does not need me or anybody else to speak on her behalf. But when the poison of the far right leads to serious threats to Jess Phillips and others, then in my book, a line has been crossed. I enjoy the cut and thrust of politics.
So the question is, what are you going to do with the crossing of that line? It's all good and well to talk about, in this case, implying that Musk has crossed that line. Okay, what do you do? Otherwise, the line's irrelevant. You're not going to do anything about it. We talk about this in the context of Ukraine all the time. These red lines that you paint, and then you get up to them and nothing happens. Like, or we paint our own invisible red lines. Starmer needs to do something, I think, about Musk in a more explicit way. But I understand why he's not. And this is kind of what both James O'Brien and indeed what the Novara media team were talking about, what they end up talking about, which is, how does he deal with Musk? Do you get embroiled in a direct, full frontal combat with the world's most powerful man who will be at the centre of the White House after January the 20th?
The robust debate that we must have, but that's got to be based on facts and truth.
Not
on lies.
Agree.
Not on those who are so desperate for attention that they're prepared to debase themselves and their country. So this government will get on with the job of protecting victims, including child sexual abuse, mandatory reporting, accelerating the processes. But what I won't tolerate is this discussion and debate based on lies without calling it out. What I won't tolerate is politicians jumping on the bandwagon simply to get attention, when those politicians sat in government for 14 long years, tweeting, talking, but not doing anything about it.
And that's all good and right, and he's right. But if you're not going to tolerate it, what are you going to do when they do that? How does not tolerating it look? What does it look like?
Desperate for attention, that they're amplifying what the far right is saying. So that's what I say about Jess Phillips.
Forgive me for going back on Musk's attacks. You've described what he has been alleging as lies against Jess Phillips.
It's Robert Peston.
He said you should be in prison. You're a lawyer. That sounds libelous. Will you take legal action against him?
My record is it's open. I mean, there was nothing secret about being Director of Public Prosecutions. Every single case I prosecuted went to court and was looked at by a judge. I had an independent inspectorate, had access to every single file of every case anytime he or she wanted, and I was overseen by the Attorney General, which for 3 of the 5 years was a Tory Attorney General. So that record, I mean, and so in a sense, rather than me trying to say any more about what I did when I was in office, you can access this material, you know where it is, you know what the facts are. But it is an important point that's more, the reason I've emphasised this today is because it's more, this isn't about whether I defend myself or my record, frankly. That record is there, you can see it, you can make your own mind up. It is something about the nature of our politics. Because once we lose the anchor that truth matters, in the robust debate we must have, then we're on a very slippery slope. And when
Hugely important that,
politicians,
yes.
and I mean politicians, who sat in government for many years, are casual about honesty, decency, truth,
Yes.
and the
Yes.
rule of law,
Yes.
calling for inquiries because they want to jump on a bandwagon of the far right, then that affects politics, because a robust debate can only be based on the true facts. And that's why this is actually an important point about our politics, not about what anybody may or may not say on Twitter. That actually isn't the main issue. The main issue is, what are politicians here doing to stand up for the things that matter to our democracy?
And this is where he's tailoring his answer towards, and his action towards, what people in British politics should be doing and saying. And I get that. I do get that. I'm just disappointed, because I would want a massive fight with Elon Musk, but I think something does need to be done. I think the American political system or establishment, if you like, must be absolutely bamboozled by what Elon Musk is doing, and not a little frustrated. He's not doing the relationship with America any good at all. He's directly attacking one of the US's biggest allies, directly attacking us, our leadership, our government.
And the way that we have robust debate. That's why I want to call this out, because I think it really matters. And it matters not just to me, not just to the Labour Party, but it ought to matter, and it used to matter, to all political parties. And it's a sign of where the Tory party have got to, that we're even having this debate. Thank you very much, Robert. Can I go to, I've got Chris Hope.
Chris Hope, GB News. I'm afraid I must ask also about the grooming gang scandal. Critics will say it's not a far-right bandwagon issue, Prime Minister. The ICSA report looked at just 6 towns where grooming gangs were operating. Rochdale got one mention in 400 pages. We have found at GB News court reports showing gangs operating in 50 towns across the country. Are you certain, as Prime Minister, it's not going on today? Why don't you order a national public inquiry to join the dots between 50 towns, not 6, barely mentioned in the J report? Are you afraid it might expose failings as your role as a DPP? And that's why Elon Musk says, were you complicit in the rape of Britain? You have not. To go after the far right on this does not go to the heart of the problem.
No. Look, Chris, on my record, I think you were actually covering crime when I was DPP. You were quizzing me at the time for The Telegraph as the crime correspondent, I think for the entire 5 years, if I'm right. And quite rightly too, I'm not complaining in the slightest. But you looked at my record for 5 years with me as I was doing the job, facing your questions. You've got access to all of the material. So, in a sense, you can look at it. I've set out what I did. I actually changed the system because I could see some of the things that were going wrong. I wasn't prepared. Unlike some Tory politicians, I'm not tweeting about it or talking about it. I got on with changing it. In relation to the serious point you do make, because this is the victims here suffered terrible abuse, unthinkable, unspeakable, genuinely sickening abuse, and then they weren't listened to. That has to be taken seriously. We have to do everything we possibly can to make sure that never happens again. That's why I made the changes I did within criminal justice. Among the reasons I came into politics was because I felt that it couldn't all be done within the criminal justice sphere alone. It had to be done more broadly. On the question of this sort of call for an ever-increasing number of reviews, there have been a lot of reviews, including localised reviews. Including into Oldham, for example. The Mayor of Manchester did his review, and the J
Andy
report
Burnham
was intended to look at the different types of exploitation that went on. It was a comprehensive review. What Professor J said was really important there, and because I completely agree, which is this doesn't need more consultation. It doesn't need more research. It just needs action. There have been many.
So, in this case, going back to the actual grooming gang scandals, as long as the Labour government actually do action now and put into place these recommendations, then this should go some way to solving these issues, or at least, making this situation better going forward. That's what they have to do. And I'm sure the Labour government at the moment is working overtime today, tonight, and say, right, we need a plan in place. And this is why you can make an argument that actually Elon Musk has expedited certain things. It's good that he's done this, but it's all about the intentions. He's not intending to make our system better. He doesn't really care about these people, I'm fairly sure. I think there's a whole sense of pearl clutching here, because if he really cared, he would do the requisite work to actually find out what's really been going on for the last 15 years. But he's not done that because he doesn't care, because he's trying to be divisive. So if someone's intention is to be divisive and to slander people or libel people, then you can't celebrate him for, doing X, Y, and Z. I mean, you can if you use a strict consequentialist ethical framework, but then you're taking away his intention. Like that's saying, oh, well done, you're a murderer and you killed that person, but actually that person wasn't very nice, so well done. No, what you still did was a horrible murder, but it just so happens the outcome was quite good of you doing that horrible, morally egregious act. So the point of using that is to explain that, we shouldn't be, even if something good comes out of Elon Musk doing this, we shouldn't celebrate the way Elon Musk has gone about doing this, right? Because he doesn't really have the best intentions at heart, is my opinion. And we can tell that because he's going after only one particular type of grooming gangs. So he's ignoring all the white grooming gangs. He's being incredibly divisive. He's only going after one political party. He's not saying anything about Donald Trump. He's not saying about Jeffrey Epstein. There are all these areas of complete double standard that show that Elon Musk is not being genuine.
Reviews, this constant asking for a further review, no stone should be left unturned. But frankly, it's time for action. Get on with it. Why didn't the last government implement the J requirements? Got to answer that question. For 10 years we've had reviews and reports. Did they act? No. They're now tweeting and talking about what they think should have been done. I've got some pretty basic questions to answer in relation to that.
And he's absolutely right there. Look, 14 years of government, at least 10 years of reports into this. If you're talking about things being covered up and not having happened, they were the ones in control. Why are you not asking this of the Tory government previously?
Thank you very much.
You say the sort of language Elon Musk uses matters to democracy here and has a serious negative impact on it. Musk is in a couple of weeks' time going to be a senior member of the US administration,
and here's the nub
by
of it.
Donald Trump. So are you taking this as direct attack from his administration, and will you ask Trump to tone it down?
I'm actually making a more general point. I'm not going to individualise this to Elon Musk or anybody else. I'm making more because actually I'm very concerned about where the Tory party is going on this. And
this is entirely his response here. So when James O'Brien says, what is Keir Starmer going to do? And I've been wondering this. He's obviously thought about this. They gamed all the options, and I think they've decided that going on a full frontal attack on Elon Musk is not going to be easy and not going to be beneficial, and also could affect relationships with the US. So they're saying, right, we're going to look at this in a more general sense, and we're going to attack its manifestation in the UK, in the cloisters of political power there. I would go down the Brazilian route personally and just go full on attack mode on Musk, but I don't know if that would be a sensible thing, to be honest. You can't know at the moment.
I think only a few months ago it would have been unthinkable.
And this is true.
Things to have been said about Jess Phillips that was said recently, without all political parties and the leader of the opposition calling it out in terms. I genuinely believe that. I don't think it was that long ago that you would have all expected that reaction. You'd have all been challenging the leader of the opposition. Will you denounce this? This isn't fair. Because it's,
And this is what I talked about in my video earlier, where Lewis Goodall was interviewing Richard Tice and said, "Are you going to? Is this right? Is what Elon Musk said right?" And then Richard Tice says he's got the right to say that. No, not has he got the right. Is he right? This is a moral evaluation, not talking about whether people have the right to say things or not. Yes, we are accepting that he has the right to say that. Was it right to say that? And Richard Tice wouldn't answer that. And then, so you've got the Conservatives and Reform here not backing the Labour government in the condemnation of this kind of rhetoric. And that's what Keir Starmer is talking about. He's saying, we can't have this. We need to be singing off the same song sheet here. We need to be having the same approach to what public discourse should look like. And if you're not going to condemn Elon Musk for saying that, then you need to take a long, hard look at yourself.
put a member of parliament, my member of parliament, at risk.
Jess Phillips.
That's not good. That's why I said
Joe Cox was murdered for less.
So this isn't about America or Musk. I'm talking about our politics. I'm talking about the responsibility that our politicians have in calling this out for what it is and distancing themselves and condemning it. Because if you're not prepared to stand up as a Tory MP and denounce what's been said about Jess Phillips, who's now had threats made to her, then you need to seriously consider why you're in politics in the first place, in my view.
And I absolutely agree with everything Keir Starmer has said in that. I agree wholeheartedly with everything he said. The question is, does he need to go further? And I think he does, but I also understand why he hasn't. You've got to pick your fights, and he's picking a cautious fight there. We'll see if that changes. We'll see. I mean, what I would like to have seen is Elon Musk being reprimanded by the American political establishment. That's what I'd like to see, and that's what should happen. I'd also like to see the American ambassador called into Whitehall and given a stiff bloody talking to. Not that he has a control over Elon Musk, but you know, what's going on here? Mate, read him in, or we've got international issues. So there needs to be, I think, a stronger response, but I understand why it has been cautious. Let me know what you think. What should the right thing, what should be the right response of Sir Keir Starmer? I know this is a long video, but this is a big topic and it requires some background information for a lot of people who aren't knowledgeable about this. I'm not particularly knowledgeable about this. I've seen documentaries in the past, and this has been rumbling on for, as I say, over a decade. But Elon Musk, as Johnny come lately, seems to want to blow this up as if this is all brand new news that no one knows anything about. Well, you guys over the pond might not know about it, but we certainly do. So don't come lecturing us about what we should and shouldn't be doing when we're angry enough about certain things about this anyway. But hopefully things are taking place, and there have been inquiries. Stop calling for inquiries. There have been inquiries. There should have been enough inquiries by now, both local and national. And how about looking at what the Conservative government did or didn't do in the 14 years that they were in charge while this was all taking place? Or, at least... I mean, some of this has been going back to the 1980s, right? But you get my point. Anyway, thank you for sharing that time with me. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.